Hello and welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program in which we speak with church leaders from all around the world to the situation of the Catholic Church, especially in areas where she suffers discrimination or persecution. Namibia is a small country of about 2.5 million people on the southwest coast of Africa. While the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa, Namibia is nonetheless home to rich natural resources and mineral deposits, including diamonds, zinc, lead and copper. And Namibia is the world's fourth largest supplier of uranium. Namibia is also a very culturally rich nation, hosting as many as 10 different tribes and ethnic groups, which live alongside each other in relative harmony. Here to tell us more about Namibia and the work of the Catholic Church in the country, it's my great privilege to welcome Bishop Willem Christiaans of the diocese of Keetmanshoop in Namibia. Your Excellency, thank you for being here today with us on our program.
You're welcome, Mark. I'm very happy to be here.
Your Excellency, before we get into the topics of Namibia and the church situation in Namibia, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What was growing up in Namibia like for you?
I'm coming from a very staunch Catholic family. Mom and dad having 11 children.
What number are you?
I am number two from the top.
Wow.
And grew up in that environment. My mom was a staunch churchgoer and instilled in all 11 of us real faith, Catholic faith. And up till this day, we're all still practicing Catholics.
Are there any other religious in your family?
I had a sister who joined, and after 10 years, she found another way and became a teacher. And today she's also very much involved in church life and so forth, yes.
Your own story. When was it that you first had a sense that you might have a calling?
I was still in primary school, in a Catholic school.
So young.
Very much so, in a Catholic school, and the nun who was the principal, she was somehow just on my case, as I would say, all the time. I became an altar server at a very young age after First Holy Communion, and since then she checked on me all the time. The two priests in the parish, they've been there for many years, and they formed a team of 3.
You had no chance.
I had no chance whatsoever, yes. And my mom always just been there to support, and whatever the principal told her to watch carefully over this boy, she did that and always tried to guide and to take care of matters, having to go to church and getting involved in youth groups and things like that, yes.
If I'm not mistaken, you are one of the youngest bishops in the Namibian Bishops' Conference. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
What was it when you received the call from the nuncio? What was your first reaction?
So I became administrator of the diocese after my predecessor retired. And for 6 months, I was the one guiding the diocese. I've been the Vicar General before that, very much already known with the cases in the diocese, its trend. What are the things that gives life to this diocese? I've been very much involved. Even if I have to go back further, I've been the provincial superior of the priest. The congregation I belong to is the Oblates of St. Francis de Sales.
So there was almost a vocational preparation, if you will, for this present position for you. But it must have still come as a bit of a surprise.
Oh, very much so. I was part of the Pontifical Mission Societies. I enjoyed this ministry, having to travel to parishes. And suddenly, when the nuncio mentioned this to me, I was taken aback a little bit, and I found it interesting. He said to me, "What is your answer?" And I was sitting there, he says, second time, "What is your answer?" I said, "Can I have time till maybe tomorrow?" He says, "No, we want the answer right now." Now, yes. Right. So I was happy to say, well, commit myself, and with God's help, I'm available, yes.
And here you are today.
Praise God.
Your Excellency, I want to talk a little bit about Namibia, some of the beauties and some of the challenges, of course, that the church and the country face. Namibia is a very culturally rich country. If I'm not mistaken, there are, I think, about 10 different ethnic groups or even more living together in relative harmony. I think it's not an exception in Africa, but somehow it is unique. How would you say that this social cohesion is maintained in Namibia?
It's actually a very interesting thing that there is this kind of harmony. It came from a negative thing to the country during the years of apartheid. And one language policy was implemented in all the schools, having diverse cultural groups and so forth. One language was taught in schools.
And just to go back a little bit just for our understanding, Namibia was, up until 1990, a part of South Africa, and hence you were subject to the same rules and regulations of the Afrikaans policy at the time, which was this apartheid. Is that
Absolutely,
correct?
absolutely. And that Afrikaans policy was implemented in all the schools. They revolted against that in 1976, the language being sort of forced. But it had, if you think about it, this advantage that all was 85% of people in this country spoke Afrikaans, despite having their different languages and so. So to be able to communicate, I think that was the one important thing that made this tolerance, harmony, knowing each other more relevant, because we could communicate in one language to be understood.
Namibia is not only culturally rich, but also very rich in natural resources. And yet Namibia is one of the poorest countries in Africa. Can you tell me, where's the disconnect? Where is this contradiction that is this wealth and yet the poverty of the people?
Right. This is the kind of thing that you find in many, many countries, and especially in countries that are rich in the so-called third world countries, where a few enrich themselves with the resources of that country, and very little comes to the general population. And this has been exactly the same with us. Having riches in minerals, as you said, but also the fish resources along our very long coast. I mean, it's nearly 1,500 more coastline that we have, rich in those kind, and even the natural things inland, agriculture-wise. All those resources
They've been concentrated in the hands of a few.
Absolutely.
And is there not a frustration that builds within the population? Why the young people, for example, how does this play out within the population?
I give you one example of the frustration among the young people. We had a recent scandal, which is called the fish rot scandal, where the Ministry of Fisheries, with some high-ranking officials, had a sham and a system organized where they sort of accumulated millions of dollars with a Norwegian company, selling them the rights to catch, but the money went foremost in the pockets of these individuals until it broke out, and they are all in jail at the moment, awaiting. And young people looked at that and said, look at the resources that was spent on these individuals instead of giving it to us for opportunities to study, to build a life.
In such a resource-based economy, is this resource a blessing or a curse?
It's both, but I would say more of a curse. Just recently, a discovery was made of oil and gas along the Namibian west coast. It links up with Angola, that's an oil-producing country, and that line of these resources are running down the Namibian coast. When that announcement was made, it didn't bring much joy. There was this whole frustration of, we would rather not have this because it's going to go the same way again. So there is this pessimistic view of having this resource and yet looking at it and say, will it bring us also advantages for us in the lower classes of society, and not for a few people having already resources that they have helped themselves to.
And the balance with nature. How does the church, for example, work in this area of the extraordinary resources, the need for work, but at the same time, now, especially with the pontifical encyclic Laudato Si, on the question of the respect for nature?
Absolutely. It's a very important question. There is a company in the northeast of the country, right in this beautiful area of the Okavango Delta, that have started to drill for gas and oil exploration. Well, a small portion was given to them, but suddenly the realization was more licenses were extended to some others. And this brought a lot of anger, because that area is such a beautiful natural part of the country with Botswana. But in a whole, people are looking and said, in light of the encyclical by Pope Francis, we need to take care of it. And these are things that disturbs the environment quite a lot. So people have protested, and now it has come to a point where government is uncertain. Even though it knows we need some of these resources to be put into monetary terms for the country, they are quite careful, because people will really stand up.
Now they're watching.
They're watching carefully, yes.
Your Excellency, let's turn a little bit to some of the better news coming out of Namibia. Despite naturally the issues of poverty and everything we've been talking about, compared to its neighbors, the country has done remarkably well, for example, in poverty reduction. Since independence in 1990, the proportion of Namibians living below the poverty line has been halved. There's also been good progress with regards to literacy rates. How much of the role, or rather, what has been the role of the Church in this progress? I think in many regards, the Church is an unsung hero in many of these questions of literacy, for example, literacy rates and education. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of the Church in this good news?
Our schools have played a big part to further education in this country, together with government, yes.
How many schools does the Church run in Namibia?
We ran about 21 schools, primary schools, middle schools, as well as secondary schools. Connected to that are the hostels where we keep where these learners go from there to school.
The boarding houses.
That's correct, yes. And so in that regard, schools have played a big, big role. Catholic education, and this is why we thank our missionaries for the wonderful work that they've been doing to establish schools that are good, that provide quality education. Government has acknowledged that and say, with the Catholic Church, we can go a long distance, because this is. And so we have tried with feeding schemes in our schools to try, and also where the parents at home cannot provide for these children, the government gives a subsidy to our schools, and from there we see that it is justly distributed, that the children are fed properly. And with our donor organizations, which we're so grateful for, has assisted in many, many ways in this regard.
Having said this, a further challenge following the education, you have young people who come out as graduates, and yet you have among the youth 46% unemployment. What does this, first of all, why? And then secondly, what frustration does this generate? And then what are some of the social ills that come as a consequence of having young people who are educated but sitting around with nothing to do?
That's a big challenge, and this is sort of very unsettling. Young people are asking the question, where have we gone wrong? We have all the means that we could use if to educate and put up a better world for us. Unfortunately, as we mentioned already, the resources are not channeled in the right direction. Leaves the young people frustrated. Government is trying its best now to try and see how they can stimulate the whole process of getting young people involved, but it's a big, big challenge.
And what about the secondary challenges? Drug abuse, is this also something as a consequence of this frustration? Do you see the resulting collateral implications, which are drug abuse and all of the other social ills that we know? How is this in Namibia, or is this not such a problem?
It is indeed a big problem. Since our young people are not employed, they really have sort of fallen into this trap of drug and alcohol abuse. There's a lot of challenges in this regard. The government has asked the church to really take hands with him and to address this problem.
How do you do that?
We have this whole system of trying to get our young people interested in training of certain leadership programs, in trying to keep themselves aware of in this system of the digital media, train them in all different spheres and so forth. But it remains a challenge because young people are looking for work, physically to be involved and to also to be in many ways productive. And that poses a big challenge. We're still figuring it out. How are we going to really address this properly? There are ways, but it seems it's a mammoth task.
You have 48,000 Catholics in your diocese, and you have been outspoken in the call to the young people, the greater participation of the young people. In fact, you've been saying young people need to move towards a path of holiness. Can you tell us, in your own diocese, how you're trying to encourage the young people in their engagement and their path to holiness?
I've been very fortunate to attend that synod in 2018 where the document Christus Vivit was sort of given to us. We worked through the process. When I came back, I immediately addressed the priest. I said to them, this is the path that we need to look at. And appointing 2 youth chaplains in my diocese, 2 young priests, very enthusiastic, and I've given them the task to get leadership among our young people, to train them, that they should organize them, that they need to become much more part of the church than what we currently have.
So you make them responsible?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And catechists?
Catechists, this is one of our big challenges, that we have a beautiful center to train all of these catechists all over the diocese, and we have been venturing into that. Unfortunately, this is one of the areas that we would really appeal to train our catechists, people that would take care in our rural areas, areas where we cannot reach as often. They are the backbone of the faith life in rural parts of our diocese, and that's one of our challenges that we truly face.
I want to stay a little bit with the faith situation here in Namibia, and up to 97% of Namibians identify with Christianity and approximately 25% identify as Catholics. So a very, very strong Christian presence. Nonetheless, traditional leaders of traditional faiths as heads of communities are key decision makers and the custodians of ancestral traditional beliefs and cultures. What is the relationship between the Catholic Church and the traditional leaders, and how do you also, as a Catholic Church, try and engage to help perhaps keep some of the culture, the original culture of the Namibian population?
Mark, in the Southern Diocese where I come from, I have to deal only with one traditional authority and with the different, of course, groups, but I've met twice with them. In actual fact, they wanted me to be a person that listened to these groups because they have their little battles amongst each other. And
what tribe is this one?
This is called the Bondel Swarts. Tamingui in the local language, but it is, the Afrikaans name is just Bondel Swarts, and it's part from the Nama traditional authorities. They form part of that.
And they've reached out to you for your...
Yes, because they basically, many of them are Catholics, Lutherans. We do not have the real traditional where we would go with going to a village to do all sorts of medicinal things like that. No, this is a traditional authority that has the faith life is important to them. Been part of different of the main religions in this country, Catholics, Lutherans, Anglicans. They're from there, these leaders. So we do not have really in the rest of the country the basic traditional ways of doing. It is not in this diocese where I come from.
Do you have a challenge at all with syncretism, that is, the mixing of the traditional belief with Christianity?
Not that much, no. Since this whole thing of the faith life in these traditional authorities is very much tied to the Catholic religion and other religions.
A challenge within Christianity is, well, let's say, a challenge, perhaps the wrong word, but a fact within Christianity is the growth of the Pentecostal churches. I believe you have excellent relations with the Lutherans and probably with many of the evangelical churches, but there are, of course, some more aggressive, if you would. What is the situation here, and how do you relate? How do you find common ground?
We have had this challenge a few years back where the whole thing of the Pentecostal religion trying to get our Catholic youth members to the church, because they were looking for, the young people were looking for this, what they call the lively services and also musical instruments playing a role. And actually the Pentecostal church have campaigned actively. In actual fact, sometimes in the rural areas where the presence of no priest or catechist, going there rarely, they have been using our podiums to address our young people and get them. But we have managed to get all of that sort of sorted out in ways that we've put catechists, this beautiful, wonderful thing of having a catechist in those areas, have sort of brought a sort of a way where we can easily get our young people back to church. We've also started to incorporate in church, of course, the liturgical celebrations, instruments that's known in the area. Would it be drums? Would it be electrical implements? And that has sort of motivated our young people to say, in our youth groups and wherever we are, this is the way to do, instead of having to leave the church. At this very moment, many have come back. This is what young people do. When they see things are moving in a direction that also make them part of the church, they come back, and we've been very fortunate.
In fact, you mentioned earlier that your diocese is growing.
Yes, absolutely.
You're having young people coming to the church.
Have young people coming back to the church. It's very consoling. The whole thing that has at the moment made a very big difference is with this latest of the synod preparation and having the diocesan phase of synodal consultations. Our young people have been part of this process. In actual fact, telling us, we as young people, this is the way we think the Diocese of Keetmanshoop would function much better, because their voices were heard lots over the whole diocese. We were fortunate that everyone was excited and gave them the chance and the platform to address us, and very impressed with what the young people suggested.
What were some of the messages from the young people?
Some of the messages, we want to be part in church, to not have in the structures of pastoral meetings, finance meetings, finance committees. Those committees, we want to be part of it. That's where decisions are made. That's where you make decisions about us. We want to be part of that. And we said yes, and we have gone in that. In actual fact, from this process, we are working at this very moment on a pastoral plan for the diocese, incorporating all these different elements. Young people are part of the process. I'm so happy that they have really come out, spoke their mind. Sometimes it was very critical, which is necessary for self-evaluation for us as a diocese. Their voices have been heard. Sometimes the older people were just shaking their heads and say, the young people, they have so many ideas, how it's going to be practical. We said, we're giving them a chance. We help them to make things
just to have their voice heard, I think, is already an enormous step.
Absolutely, Mark.
What are some of the challenges you would face? Your diocese is vast. It is arid. Your population of 48,000 is impressive. What would be some of the challenges working in such a rural environment?
We've been very fortunate that our missionaries, once again, thanks to them, have put up structures in all places, even in the rural areas, what we would call outstations. The facilities are there for people to meet, to come together. And so those kind of challenges have been taken care of the missionaries. The challenge we have at the moment is to have the training for many of these leadership courses, training of catechists. Those are the challenges for us. And for us, the resources to do that is very minimal. And that really for us would be, if we would have a little sort of access to some resources for training in these areas, we would be very grateful.
Which brings me to the question for those who are with us today in our program, what is it that we can do? Pray? How can we help you in a concrete way?
First of all, prayer, of course, is always the most important. We are truly grateful for all the prayers going out over the world for the mission territories. That for us is so important, and that is number one, praying for the missions. Secondly, if in some way there are organizations, families who want to say, we want to see that catechists are trained. We want to see that our young people are empowered by training. We would really appreciate that
to form them in the teaching of the Church.
Absolutely, Mark.
Your Excellency, thank you for having been with us today in our program.
My pleasure, Mark, and thank you for having me.
It was a great pleasure. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today in our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more about the situation of the Church in Namibia, perhaps how you might be able to help, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.